let me show you how I trim this down. This was a little bit challenging. I found these two triangles. Now they measure like 11.5, 12 inches. So I can get 2/2 of a 9-inch square out of here, basically half square triangles. So ordinarily what you would do is cut a 9-inch square, which 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and come out here 4 and 5. Here's my 9 to 9. So if I were to do this right there and right there, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so this is 9 inches. I am going to increase this, though, by 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to take my little ruler just to make sure. So my line is right here, and I'm just going to add 1/4 inch and move that ruler right in place. And let's see, do this one. So this is the line I'm cutting. I'm going to add 1/4 inch, make sure my ruler's right there. Okay, so that's where I'm going to cut. Now I'm adding that 1/4 of an inch because I'm cutting this in pieces, and I just feel better having a little extra to work with. So when I'm cutting triangles from triangle scraps, just in case this isn't square and I have to trim some of it off, and you just don't know what'll come up. Now, these are bias pieces, and does it measure 2.5? What does it measure? Yeah, 2.5, so I could potentially use that. But just know when you have a bias piece, you have to be really careful when you sew because they stretch. You see how much that stretches? It just curls right out. So you got to be careful with that. All right, now let me get some things cut. I think I'm ready. I think I have everything I need now. The two squares that I cut, the 5 1/4 and the 7 1/4, both need to be cut in half on the diagonal. And that is because they're going to be triangles. So basically we're cutting half square triangles here. And I'm just putting them both on top of each other so I can do it in one fell swoop. I'm going to go from corner to corner to corner. And let me just make sure, there it is. And then I'm just going to cut from one side to the other. And now my triangles are ready. This I'm going to be doing something a little different. We're going to start from the center of the block. And what I have here are my two 7-inch pieces. And I put a red and a green together. And I'll show you why that's important here in just a moment. But you can see I took my 1/4 inch seam. And now I'm going to make sure everything's lined up well, and I'm going to cut it at 3.5 inches. What we did last time when I made that hot pad is I cut 4 3.5 inch squares, which is fine, and that worked out really well. But this way is going to be a bit easier, and I'm going to show you why. Now this one I pressed, and I'm going to bring the second piece with the other two colors, and I'm going to put these together, but I don't want the greens and the reds side by side. I want them to be opposite because this will be how my 4-patch colors will lay out. So I'm going to put these like this, and what I want is for my seams to go this way. And you can see that the seams are going to line up on the edges. And we have these two right here that don't want to open for me, but we're going to come over to this side, and I'm going to make sure, just like we did before when we nest the seams, that these seams are side by side. And my preferred method is to sew coming towards the seam allowance over the seam and then sew back. And the reason that works so well is it's nudging this so I get a good, nice, clean, square connection in the middle. And it also is going to make sure this seam allowance is always going down. You know, sometimes if they're facing up, they want to flip over on you. So I'm going to sew this side here, and then I'm going to come back over here. Now, I tell you, this might be silly and a little over the top, and you can decide if it's something you want to do. But I do the same thing. I have this seam going this way. So I'm going to have seams going in two different ways, but I'm going to cut this down the middle to make a 4-patch, so it's okay. It doesn't really matter. Let me show you what I mean. This is what I was talking about, where I can sew it this way and make sure those seams nest really well there, and the same here. So once that's done, I press this, and I just press this seam and this seam. I don't press across the middle. And so I'm going to line this up, and I'm going to cut it at 3.5 inches, because again, this is a 7-inch square, and I would have been using 3.5-inch squares. So essentially that's what I've done now, is I've created 4 3.5-inch squares, but now I have them in a 4-patch. And what I'll do now is go through and press these seams all the way to the outer edge so they're nice and flat, just like this. What I want you to notice is just how perfect these corners come together. And that's because we sewed it like this. So these edges were right here at that seam where we're sewing, and we know exactly where it's going to be. There are other methods that have you sew pieces and then you sew it down the middle, but when you're sewing seams down the center, you can't always be as accurate as when you're on the edge, and I find this works out really well. The blocks come out in different order, green to green, red to red, but notice that these prints kind of trade places. Oh, and the other thing is this needs to measure 6.5. Let's see how we did here. And I measure across the middle. Look at that, 6.5 that way, and just a smidge over 6.5 this way. So we're in great shape. Now I'm going to start putting triangles on and show you how this goes together. One of the reasons I like starting this with a 4-patch is because I have the center of my block already marked. And when I go to put my triangle on, and I did cut these at 5, where were we? At 5.25. And because when I did the first one, the sample, it sort of came out a lot bigger. I think I may have cut them at 5.5 just to be sure I had enough. But now look at this. When that point is right on that line, this is perfect. It's right in the center. And so otherwise we would have had to find the center of this triangle and hook it up there. Now the same thing here. We're going to put the triangle in place with the center right in the middle, and just sort of hold it while you adjust this edge and make sure that's in the center. Turn it over to take a peek, and it's equal on both sides. So I'm going to put these two, and then I'll show you how we're going to put the 3rd and 4th sides on here. My triangles are sewn on. I press it to the outside. You want to make sure that your center square measures 6 inches, because we're using 5.25-inch blocks here for our triangles, and in order for those to fit, we need a 6.5-inch square, which means it'll finish at 6 inches. So seam to seam, that's what we want to take a look at. And as you're sewing, when you're cutting your threads, you can certainly trim these dog ears as you go, but for the sake of showing you how this works, I'm doing it this way. The other thing is when you come to cut these edges, it's always a good idea to put your ruler lines along a seam, because then that makes sure everything is even and square. So here we are. We're going to put these two on, and then I'm going to get started putting the green ones on. So this is going to go together quite quickly. You can see how fast this is. And this is where we are so far. So I finished my inner border and I put these 2 triangles on. Now I'm putting the 2 in the opposite direction. And what I want to show you is, because we don't have a center line to go through to match up, I'm going to fold this over to find the middle, and I put a crease in it. And then I put a pin into the crease, because that fold gives me a spot exactly where to put the pin. It sort of fits right in there, so I don't have to worry about whether it's the right place or not. And then I'm going to line this up with this edge. But the way I'm going to do it is line that pin up right here. Let me bring you in just a bit. Here we go. So you can see these are my 2 1/4-inch seams, and we have that point right there. that is the point of this square, the corner. And so I want that to line up with my pin, and I'm going to bring this over just the littlest bit. So now that pin lines up here, and I want to make sure my fabric is on the edge, and since this one's just a little bit high, I'm just going to split the difference. Okay, now I want to make sure I have my pin right here. When I sew this, I'm going to sew just inside that point. And from here, I'm going to begin at the edges. Now, one thing I also recommend, because these pieces are getting longer, it's not uncommon for them to want to flip up a little like this. So it's not a bad idea just to pin them in place. Don't pull or stretch anything, because remember, this is a bias cut edge. And I'm going to sew from the top, which is the top, which is a straight of the grain. And that'll put my bias on the bottom, so I'm not going to have a problem with stretching it as I sew. And I'm just going to go like this. We're going to be ready then with this piece right there. And then it's going to be time to add our outer triangles. Oh my goodness, there's a lot going on in this quilt, but it's going to be so pretty. At this point, your block should measure about 12.5, maybe 12 3/4. Mine is on the larger side, and I'm going to show you why. You can see here that I did not sew right to the points. There's about 1/8 of an inch there, and that 1/8 of an inch makes this bigger. So this center square, instead of just being 9 inches, was probably closer to 9 1/8 to 9 1/4. But I'm okay with that. It just means that this center block is going to be larger. So now when I go to put my corners on the outside, I'm going to do the same thing. And I'm going to bring them to this edge rather than right to the point. So it's going to be just a little bit larger. And you can decide if that's something you want to do, because what I do is I take a scant seam. Let's see where it is. What I want to show you is that my seams are not always right at 1/4 inch. I take it out just a little bit narrower, because then that gives me a fudge factor. And I like doing that with anything with triangles. See, here's my 1/4 inch right here, and I'm sewing right inside. That's called a scant seam. If you do that, your block will come out a bit oversized like this, and you can either trim it down to size, but you got to be careful because you might be trimming off your points. Because this is a single block, I'm not making a lot of blocks to join together. I'm okay with letting this become larger. That just means that when I add these corners on the sides, then I'm going to be just a little bit, maybe 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch bigger than what I normally would have been. It doesn't matter on this particular quilt. Once you get past this block, you're going to add the 2 triangles on each side, and then we're just going to add strips around the edge, and we're not even measuring them. We're just going to sew them on, and then we're going to do them on each corner. So this is incredibly forgiving. This part right here is where you do want the accuracy from the beginning. So this finished square should measure about 6 inches. And I'm pretty much there, maybe just a smidge. This should be 9 inches. And I'm just a little bit short there. Oh no, but that's right. It would be 9 inches before the seam allowance. And then after the seam allowance, it should be 8.5. And so I'm 8 5/8. So you can see this little bit right here that I have at the point that I didn't sew all the way into that. That's my extra. That's my fudge factor. That's the way I quilt. That's the way I do this. So I want to explain to you, if you're noticing why these points don't line up exactly like some folks do, that's why. I do mine a little different, because I don't want to have to struggle with those seams that can be very difficult to match up. This is forgiving. It looks beautiful. Nobody even notices this. The other thing is it's so much easier to press this, because if you sew this seam right to that point, all that fabric is bunched up right there. When you try and fold this over and press it, it's really hard to do. So that's an explanation of what I'm doing. And now I'm going to put these two sides on and we'll go from there. All our triangles are in place, and now it's time to add the strips. And I think I'm going to go with this red and white one because it'll play off these red and white squares. And I'm going to put it on this way and sew from one edge to the other. Now I do want to make sure that these are the same size, which they are. That way my my square doesn't come out, kind of wonky. And then I'm going to sew it without cutting it first, and I'm going to show you why. So let me do that and I'll be right back. I've sewn my strip on with a 1/4-inch seam, and I pressed it so it's nice and flat. Now what I'm going to do is cut this corner so that my angles will align and continue. Now, one thing you want to do, it's easy to kind of get it off a little and make it wonky. Use the lines in your ruler. Your 45-degree lines, and you can always tell because they go from corner to corner to corner. And so what you can do is take these two right here and line them up on your seams. And then that's going to show you that you're at that number one, that this is square, but you are going to have to bring it over to get that extra edge because we need that seam allowance. We don't want to cut it off, but I do want to keep this line straight. And that shows that my piece is going to be square when I'm ready to sew it. And I also want to make sure that I have at least my 1/4-inch seam right there. And I do. Just get that twisted back. Okay, I had that turned a little bit. There we go. And now I'm going to cut this off. And this goes in my triangle pile. And the reason I didn't pre-cut this to length is because I'm going to do the same over here. And I will, again, with my lines, make sure that this is nice and square. And then take this out, keeping this line in place. And that I have a 1/4-inch there to sew my seam and sew this off, or excuse me, cut that off. So what works great about this is I can just put this piece here now, fold it down and sew it, and I'm going to have this piece without that extra triangle, so I'm not wasting as much fabric. Now I do let this hang off at least 1/4 of an inch just to make sure I have enough seam allowance. And I'm going to put this here, sew this across, and then I'll do the same cut here. And then I think what I'll do after that is start adding these. This is one long piece I have. I think I have enough to do all 4 of these sides. And I know it's a bit busy, but it's the fun colors. And I thought about putting a green here, and I'm just not sure because there's a lot of green in the middle. This is kind of a burgundy red. There's some light greens here, and that's a real Christmassy red. And I could do something around the edge in green. I don't know that I want to, that's almost kind of a too bright green. And I have this, which would certainly work. And maybe having it a little darker to the outside edges. But again, that's a bit on the busy side. I'm kind of torn. I'm not really sure just which I like the best. That is just too much. But you know what? This is the ribbon candy, and I just love this. It's going to make me happy, so that's what I'm going to use. And so once this is on, I'm going to do the same thing here and on the other side. And then I'll come back and I'll show you how we do this corner. I've added the strips to the top half here, and I just want to show you how I'm going to trim this. But first, I want you to see where we are. So here's our center block, and then we put this piece on top, just like that. All right, we've got our center block, and we have that piece. Now what we're doing is we're adding this angle. But notice that it's not going to go past this. This is basically going to be the outer edge of this hot pad or placemat or whatever you're making. So the first thing we're going to do here is trim this off. Now, this doesn't have a 45-degree angle line on it, so I'm going to use this one because I can tuck this right in the corner, line it up this way and this way. And then when I trim this corner off, I know it's going to be exact, and that's a 90-degree half-square triangle, which we can use later. Now, we're going to do the same thing up here, and let me just show you. We'll turn this around. I have this press, but it got a little crazy there on the corner. All right, so where are we? We want to cut it this way. If your ruler only has one line instead of the two, what you can do is put that line on your seam, and then this is going to align with the edge that we want to match up. Now I'm going to go to the end of those little points there. Okay, so I have this straight here, I have that right there, and now I'm going to cut this. Let me make sure I'm doing it the right way. Yep, I'm doing it at the top. I'm going to cut this here. Now, I can again reuse this corner on the other side. So let's see where I left off over here. Okay, so this one is straight. This is where I started. So we take a straight piece and we just sew it on, just like that. And I want you to see, I took a full 1/4-inch seam. See how I went right to that point there? And you can see the difference in how close I am as opposed to this corner. You see there's a lot more background around that point than there is around this one. And that's the only difference. And it's pretty insignificant, but for me, it makes quilting a whole lot simpler. Now, we have this one straight up there. I'm going to cut this one again at the angle. And if you don't have a 45, just go ahead and line this up here, line this up here, and cut. Now, if you were cutting blocks to match, to put together, trimming them to the same size, then you would want to make sure you have this angle pretty close to exact. Now, I'd say at this point, we probably are very good. But just so you know, we're taking a little leeway here, and it's going to work fine because this is a single block that's not matching up to anything, and we don't have to worry about wonky sides. And I hope I'm not overstating all that, but I just want you to know what I'm doing is going to make things easier for me. So, okay, so this is where I am. I have these two sides on, and these sides are not going to get any bigger. And here is where I have my what am I trying to say? My straight side. But remember, this straight side's only going to come out to here. So I want to start, if I can, at the top. Let's see. There, oh, look at that. How perfect is that? So this is going to go the right angle that I need. I'm just going to turn it over like this, leave about a 1/2 inch, and now I'm going to pin that and sew. But I don't need to sew all the way out to here because we're only coming out to about a 1/2 inch. So I'm going to show you how that works here in just a minute. Here's the edge I just put on. This is my outer corner. And what I'm going to do is trim the top up here. And I just make sure there's nothing underneath. And like I said, you can put one up. Actually, let's take it down more so you have a longer area to align your ruler. And just line it up with the top there. Make sure this is straight here. And there you go. What I want to show you on this one, which is the 9-inch corner that we put in, is that that's where this piece is going to stop. So we need to cut a straight line here, and then as we add each block, they're just going to kind of pyramid on top of each other. And let's see, where's my ruler? So what I'm going to do here is, let me get my 45 degree. Okay, so this will give me a cut that I will get my 45 on each side. So it's going to be a nice, straight, smooth transition so that it matches over here. But I can't line these up on my seams because I need to add a 1/2 inch seam. So I'm going to come over this way and this way. Oh, look, how perfect. So in this corner, of course, I have a 1/2 inch mark right there. So here's my 45, there's my 45, and there's 1/2 inch right there. And I'm going to put that right in my corner because that's going to give me the 10 inches that I need. And I'm going to make sure this and this look pretty darn equal. And if it's easier for you, you can put it on your mat where you have a 45-degree line to go with. But quite frankly, my mat is so full of fabric. I have scrap fabrics of every size here. But now you see where I mentioned you really only need to sew in that 1/2 inch, and that's actually more about 3/4. And so I have this little triangle that I'll cut off. But now I can use this piece for the last side. So here we have top and bottom. These two sides are finished. We have a straight edge here. We're going to flip this around. And over here, we just have one edge, and I need to get this side finished. Because remember, this is top and bottom. These are the sides. And I'm wondering if, okay, look, this is going to work out this way. And I'm going to put this piece right here. I'll trim that off. This little piece here I'll trim off before I sew. And leave a 1/2 inch. Like I said, I just leave that 1/2 inch. It's my buffer, my fudge factor. That way I know I'm not going to come up short. And I'm going to put this right here. Ah, look at, I didn't trim this before. So I'm just going to take this real quick. And I have a nice straight edge to align my ruler to. And make sure that I have a 1/4 inch here. And then I'm just going to trim that piece off. And let's see, we'll get this one on. Which way are we going? This way. Is that the right way? Yes. Sorry, my ruler. See, I have so many piles here. I don't have a place for anything. Okay, but I'm just about finished, and then I can clean my table off. So I'm going to do this and this, and I'll sew as far as that seam there, and then this is going to cut off to be the straight edge. I know I'm speaking lots of words, and I hope I'm not confusing you. Turn off the volume and just watch what I'm doing, and that way you'll see exactly. Not everybody wants the verbal dissertation and just needs the visual. I need both, so that's why I do it. So all my corners are on, and you can see they're just an extension from the middle out to the edge. But before I do that last strip, a 2.5 inch isn't going to be enough. So you can either take a 2.5 that's been sewn together to get a bigger square. But what we need to do, let me show you how I figure this out, is I need this. Let me go this way. Okay. So to figure this out, I put this right on my grid, and it's straight this way and it's straight that way. And I count how many squares I need to get this diagonal, this half square triangle. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4 by 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I have a 4-inch square, here's a 4-inch strip, and I cut it off, and make sure that's not a selvage there. And I cut it off into a square. Let me get a, well, here. All right, we're going to freehand this. So here's a 4-inch square right there. Okay, it's 4 by 4. Then I'm going to cut this half diagonally and place it right here. And you see, I have my dog ears. I have my corners. So what we need is a 4-inch square for each corner. But you're going to get 2 out of each square, so you really only need to cut 2 of these. And then, let me go ahead and make sure this is actually square. I don't want to go into this and have a wonky square to begin with. Okay, so we have 4 inches, and we have 4 inches there. Okay, we're good on that side. So what I'm going to do is cut from corner to corner, and I'll do this a second time. And now I have a corner piece for 2 of my corners like that, and that's going to square off the edge beautifully. Look at that. Doesn't that look wonderful? Okay, and then once we put these on, this is finished. And then I have some ideas I'm going to show you what to do with this. You know, the one thing before we go any further, I told you here that we stop at this point because this is going to be a hot pad. But imagine if you left all these strips on and you came out, I don't know, another 6, 8, 10 inches. What a beautiful table runner this would be. And it would be so much fun to incorporate all the different Christmas fabrics. Oh my goodness, this would be a great project for a jelly roll. But just wanted to mention that before we move on. I shall return. Look at this, all 4 corners are on. I do want to show you a trick that I do, and you can do this as you're adding these diagonal corners, is fold your piece in half and line it up here. Now you do want to make sure that your seam allowance is the same on both sides to get the correct measurement. But what you want to do is just make sure everything is straight and square on the front and the back, and that your corners, whoops, let me measure up my corners here. Your corners aligned so they're the same size, because we want to make sure that when you fold your piece up, that the edges meet and they're equal. And we are in pretty darn good shape. So I am going to do the hot pad. And there's a free tutorial down below that shows you the process. It has a different block on top, but it shows you how to make a hot pad with the Insulbrite, which is the insulation that goes between the batting pieces of the front and the back in order to absorb the steam. Because the Insulbrite keeps the heat from going through, but it will create steam. So you need to have the batting to hold the steam on the top and the bottom. And then that way it's also reversible. So we're going to do that. I just need to come up with my idea for the backing. I haven't quite finished that. And we'll see where this all goes. It's been such fun so far. Thanks for hanging in here.